which is really what we're talking about.
You had a question earlier around coherence. Right?
Yeah, part of it, I was wondering how your team, I don't know if it's the table already set, or do they set the table using the coherence framework as you get into the new deep learning or new learning for deep pedagogy? How does that?
Yeah, I think we're open and minded about it. What we try to do is, if I'm coming up with a framework like the 6 C's or the coherence framework, my criteria are 3. One is capture it comprehensively. All 3 of these are important. Capture it comprehensively. Make sure it's succinct, like not 12 things. And make sure that the components are mutually exclusive, that they're not messy conceptually overlapping. So that's how we did the 6 C's. That's how I think of the coherence making. And I would say that the coherence making model stacks up very well. And that the big issue, as I said before, is how do you implement it in a kind of orchestrated way. And so many groups now have adopted it and said that's our playbook. Like big groups, Victoria, Australia, the state. We have Joanne and Mary Jean is just over there now, and myself. They just are gobbling it up. They said this is a solution. We had so many pieces around, and this now gives us a template, and people at the school level and the state level like it. Certainly California, a number of districts have said coherence is our Bible. So I think it's pretty sound, but I'd be happy to have critique that said so-and-so is missing or it's wrongly formulated. But I do think the problem is, how do you really implement this? Because I remember our key indicator of it is the shared depth of understanding about the nature of the work. This means that everybody's doing it has to be able to articulate in a meaningful, grounded way what it is. And if they can't, then it's not coherent. It's aligned at best, but it's not coherent, because coherence is in the minds of people working together. Did you have something in mind about it?
Well, a couple things. What we've been trying to, we just weren't sure how tight that team goes in, because we feel like we've been setting the table with that, and then we're ready. I think we talked about that. We're ready to go deeper in the pedagogical, deep in learning piece, because that's not something we've been hitting. We've been hitting all the peripheral. And we just made that flip, or trying to make that flip. Well, at least some of us are. I think not everybody in the organization kind of did it that way. But certainly that was Patrick's takeaway, and we decided that made a lot of sense. So what we're kind of playing with is, if we use your framework, and we look at all 3 of the places that we tend to touch in a district, it's going to be like a district level joint work, some district leadership team, and that the same exercise happens at the site level leadership team, and the same thing happens in your PLCs. They're all looking at each other's work, so you look at, but the exercise is similar at every one of those structures, because they all have some kind of stake in the game for that.
You've actually married the coherence framework to each of those levels.
That's right.
So marrying it we're finding it very powerful.
Yeah.
In some ways, I think the question is that in the 4 times we've laid out new pedagogy for deep learning, your team hasn't explicitly or even implicitly referred to the coherence framework. No. Now we bring that.
We do.
We
That's
think it's very powerful. Yeah. Is that deliberate, or?
I don't. It's probably because they're working on deep learning.
They do talk about the 6 C's, obviously.
Yeah, but I do, maybe we have to shore that up a bit, but the 4 pieces, point number 1 has been the learning piece, whether it's deep learning or just basic, has been the one that's underdeveloped anyway, so that's where most people start. But in the recent work on leadership in the middle that haven't published yet, the image is for coherence of, let's say, a state. The image is lateral cohesion and vertical rapport. That sounds like
Say that again.
so abstract.
Sounds like
Even
emergency room
it
problem.
sounds abstract to me. Lateral cohesion, both of these are important. So lateral cohesion, just take the 3 levels, is that how do you get cohesion? Through interacting on something that's common focus. So at the district level, we want districts, lateral cohesion for me means that each district works on its intra coherence. And then there's enough interaction across districts that they start to find things in subclusters, 5 districts working together, whatever it is, that they get also more cohesive about that.
Yeah.
And the same would occur at the state level, that lateral cohesion. Let's take the different assessment, finance, professional learning, vision, whatever. And so we always had the notion of the guiding coalition being on the same page, broadly speaking, of the direction. And then the vertical rapport is the liberating downward and exploiting upward notion. In other words, there's vertical rapport. It's not cohesion because we don't necessarily think that they're working hand in glove.
Right.
They might here and there, but if they're not working hand in glove, at least they have the same rapport.
That's right.
We agree on the same agenda.
Right.
We know each other's work. We interact enough to appreciate what needs to be done to fine tune it. So
Liberating downward, what upward?
exploiting upward. Yeah. So I think this moving towards system coherence is moving towards this lateral cohesion and vertical rapport. That's the image that I
Yeah.
have
Okay.
when I think about it.
That helps.
And we haven't. I would say we should push the coherence framework thinking. Joanne and I developed it, so to speak, from our workshops in California mainly, and we use it all over the world. But we also are using deep learning, and I think what you said would be good for us to force ourselves to say what's the exact articulation between deep learning and the coherence framework. We know it within that. We can say, yeah, deep learning is the one of the quadrants, but that's not the full way of explaining the relationship.
Because that's been our way in to this. If they buy into, and I shouldn't say quite that way, but as they understand the value of the powerfulness piece of the coherence framework, we just go, this is the quadrant we want to sort of get into together. So by not mentioning it, I think it leaves an opening to kind of not be lined up quite right.
We've
And
been, I
the one
think,
thing I
more
would-
successful in conferences
Yes.
this summer, this fall, where we've explicitly laid out on the front end the coherence framework. I don't think we did that in Great Lakes last Thursday, Friday.
We did it in some breakout sessions.
Breakout.
I used it in a coherence framework.
Yeah, I think it would have been useful somehow. Like we did
Sometimes you
on-
can't do it all, but yes,
Right.
you're right.
Yeah.
I think in some ways, I think of it almost as grain size of the coherence framework. It's
Yeah.
much more targeted and focused as you dive into the system. But the exciting piece of getting into the deep learning is that becomes the driver. And so that allows teacher voice, student need, sense of belonging to drive the rest of the system, because you're really where the rubber meets the road. When
Yeah.
you get to that, you are actually in the student-to-student, teacher-to-student interaction that is the reason the system exists. So if we can drive off of that classroom practice, that student-to-student interaction, teacher-student interaction, so that the system is listening to that work and responding based on the experiences of the teaching and the learning, now we've got it, right? So that's why it's really exciting. And so when we can set that, because we tend to go in trying to just get people to do, like, as you say, some of that lateral cohesion. And we actually, I think, recently find that when when especially central office starts screaming because of the lack of cohesion, we know we've started to make progress.
Yeah.
I feel like that's the
True.
system. When we can get central office
Yeah.
up
Get their attention.
flustered,
Yeah.
now we know we've done
Yeah.
that exploitation up, and so this language really helps us, I think,
Yeah.
to, because Patrick left the void that we're trying to make concrete for people. So
Yeah.
that's useful language.
So you want to disturb people upward
That's
Right.
right.
and reassure people downward.
So if we start with the students and the
Yeah.
teachers, which is what you've
Yeah.
opened the door for through this, now the system sort of
Yeah.
pays attention, but by going after sort of the clarity of goals and that collaborative structures piece, and again, grain size of accountability and who's determining success and how, that's really.
So to Ann's point, that's exactly where a bunch of our districts in California are right now.
Right.
They're all struggling with chaos at central office because they don't know what's going on down
Right.
here.
And they're
because
all
it's been
taking it
disturbed.
personally.
Yeah, right.
That they don't have it right from the central office, frame, and they all have their wheelhouse and their expertise
Yeah.
around professional development or curriculum and instruction or assessment or accountability. And when we start actually paying attention to what's happening in the classrooms, that's when the
Yeah.
system can no longer turn its.
Yep.
Yeah.
And to your point, that's when it's very helpful to have district-to-district connections, so they
Yeah,
all at least
exactly.
recognize they're all kind of in the same space,
Right.
and that there is
Yeah.
some systemsness to that, as you talk.
Well, this is very helpful in the sense that and our own formulation, your articulation of how it's kind of could evolve or should evolve starts to feedback on how we should be thinking
Yeah,
about
yeah.
and connecting the pieces.
You might have an opportunity to try some of that tonight even because this group that you'll be meeting with, many of them have been reading coherence as their book study.
Yeah.
So you might just, lead that into the new pedagogy piece, I think might be useful using the.
Yeah, well, in my presentations, I always start with
Yeah,
coherence and then.
That makes sense.
But what do you think the best way is to get some good observations from